The first thing that hits you is the sound. Not the sound of battle as you've seen it in newsreels and recruiting posters, with neat volleys and noble music rising over the horizon. This is different. This is chaos given a voice. A low, rolling concussion that never quite stops, as if the ocean itself is being beaten with iron hammers. The air is thick with cordite and salt, with diesel fumes and the faint, sour smell of fear. Men crouch behind the thin plates of their landing craft, knuckles white on their rifles, eyes fixed on a shore they can't clearly see. In the distance, through the drifting haze of smoke and spray, an atoll lies crouched on the horizon, just a thin crescent of sand and palm trees and man-made shapes that should not be there. Bunkers, gun pits, the dark mouths of caves blown into coral. The charts say it is small. The estimates say only a few thousand enemy hold that strip of land. The planners have called it manageable. No one in these boats believes that now. A shell lands close, too close. There's no warning shriek, only a sudden towering column of water that lifts the landing craft half out of the sea and slams it back down. A Marine in the stern retches over the side, his helmet tipped back on his head. Another stares at the spot where, a few seconds earlier, a sister boat had been holding station. Now the place where it was is just a spreading circle of oil and men thrashing in the water, some already unnaturally still. Voices bark over radios, course corrections, last-minute reminders. 2 minutes to the line of departure. Keep spread, don't bunch up. Remember your sectors when you hit the beach. All of it based on assumptions. All of it balanced on numbers written on clean, white paper far away from this rumbling gray sea. The naval bombardment has been going on for hours. Battleships and cruisers have walked their shells up and down the island, cratering runways, tearing splinters from palms, shattering seawalls. Planners have repeated the same reassuring phrase for weeks. We'll blast them off the beaches. A shell weighs nearly a ton, a rate of fire measured in tons per minute. No one could live through that, they've said. But as the first wave closes in, the island begins to answer back. The puffs of white and black along the beach are not American. They are enemy guns returning fire. Splash marks begin to straddle the leading landing craft, walking in toward them with unnerving precision. Shells scream overhead, skipping like stones across the water before smashing into steel, wood, and flesh. Tracers reach out from hidden positions, feeling their way toward the packed ranks of boats. Then there is the reef. Someone, months ago, had written a single line in a report, reef present, depth uncertain. That line had passed across a desk, had been initialed perhaps, and then drowned under more urgent paperwork. There had been aerial photographs, grainy and indistinct. There had been old sailors' stories about shoals and strange tides. There had been questions, but there hadn't been time. There is never enough time in war, not for the details that seem small until they are not. The landing craft stops suddenly, jarring everyone inside. Men stumble, curse, try to peer over the gunwales. A petty officer leans out, stares down into water that is suddenly much clearer and much shallower than it should be. Black coral heads loom below the surface like submerged teeth. The coxswain throws the engine into reverse, but the tide has them. They grind to a halt hung up 50, 100, 200 yards from shore. Behind them, more boats pile up. The carefully rehearsed formation dissolves into confusion as each craft tries to find some path forward through the maze of reef and unexpected shoals. Some find slightly deeper channels and lurch ahead, alone and exposed. Others turn sideways, vulnerable to every gun on the island. The enemy gunners are not slow to see what is happening. They have survived the bombardment. They have ridden it out in bunkers that American shells could not quite find, in caves drilled deep into the coral rock, in spider holes camouflaged with logs and sand. Now they watch as their enemy stalls in shallow water, silhouetted perfectly against the gray shimmer of the sea. Machine guns begin a steady, methodical chatter. Mortars drop plunging arcs onto the clotted mass of craft and men. Light artillery joins in, then heavier guns, ranging in with brutal efficiency. On the decks of the stalled landing craft, officers look at the shoreline, at wristwatches, at the reef, and know there is only one decision left. They drop the ramps. Men are hurled forward by the press of bodies behind them. Some leap, others fall. Some step down expecting solid footing and disappear into potholes or troughs in the coral. Rifles are held over heads as boots splash and stumble through waist, deep water that is too clear, offering no concealment, no shadow to hide in. The distance to the beach, in some places, 500 yards or more. 5 football fields, under the full attention of every Japanese gun. They walk into it because there is nowhere else to go. From the decks of the offshore ships, officers and signalmen watch the tiny figures in the surf drop one by one, like grains of sand blown off a line. Wounded flounder in crimson blooms that spread and dissipate with every small wave. Some men try to push forward, then turn back under that impossible sheet of fire. Some make it to bits of half-submerged wreckage and cling there, pinned down in the water. Marines die without ever seeing the enemy who is killing them. On one of the command ships, a tall, lean naval officer stands at the bridge wing, his binoculars pressed so tightly against his eyes that the rims bite into his skin. He has watched bombardments before. He knows what they are supposed to accomplish. He has watched landings before, in North Africa, in the Solomons. He has seen bad days. But what is unfolding now feels like something worse than a bad day. It feels like a failure of imagination. His name is James Harrigan, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy. Once years ago, he volunteered for bomb disposal duty in London, when German bombs were falling every night and unexploded ordnance was a daily terror. He learned there that most disasters did not come from a lack of courage, or even a lack of resources. They came from a lack of clarity, from not knowing enough about the thing that would kill you. He lowers the binoculars, rubs at his eyes, then looks down at the chart table, where the landing plan lies neatly drawn in pencil and ink. Arrows show waves of boats hitting clean, continuous lines of beach. Timetables march in precise columns. Depth soundings near the shore are sparse. In one corner, someone has inked a note, hydrographic data limited. Assume passage over reef for LCVP and LVT at high tide. Assume. On the water below, men are dying because of that word. By the second hour, it becomes clear to everyone on the command ship that the landing is in serious trouble. The first wave is being decimated. The second wave piles up behind it, unable to get through. Radios crackle with half-coherent reports. Some beach sectors report minimal gains, others are silent. The few tanks that make it ashore vanish into smoke and fire within minutes. On certain stretches of water, the bodies of American Marines are thick, they catch the tide like a grisly net. Harrigan hears the voices on the bridge, the Admiral's staff, the gunnery officers, the operations officer fighting to reconstruct a picture of what is happening from fragments of message traffic and glimpses through binoculars. He hears the arguments over whether to commit the reserve wave or hold it back. He hears the unspoken question hanging behind all of it. How did we not see this coming? Later, much later, men will argue over the details. They will dig out memos and intelligence summaries. They will point to lines in reports about reef conditions and tide tables. They will ask why more reconnaissance was not done. Why no one went in close with a sounding line and a notebook before the battle. They will ask why no one had the job of asking those questions, of checking those numbers, of treating the shoreline itself as a deadly enemy that must be studied and defeated. But right now, in the thunder and smoke off this nameless strip of coral and sand, those arguments do not help the men drowning in shallow water within sight of their objective. Harrigan watches a burning landing craft roll slowly onto its side, spills men into the froth. Some do not resurface. He feels the weight of every shell he helped load into bombardment plans, every on paper. Success that did not become reality on that beach. In his gut, he knows what this is. This is an old way of war colliding with a new kind of battlefield. And in the space where old methods break apart and new ones have not yet been born, there is a terrible kind of improvisation. Bodies as trial and error. By nightfall, the beachhead has been clawed into existence, but at a cost that sends a shudder through the fleet and back across the Pacific, all the way to the planners in Pearl Harbor and Washington. Tarawa, BTO. Whatever name history gives to this island, the word will become shorthand for bloody, for unprepared, for never again. Not like this. In meeting rooms and wardrooms, the after-action reports roll in. Numbers first, because numbers are safe. Casualties, killed, wounded, missing. Numbers of boats lost. Numbers of tanks that failed to reach shore. Tonnages of shells expended. Then the words, unexpected reef. Inadequate hydrographic reconnaissance. Enemy fortifications more resilient than projected. Somewhere in the sea of paper and grief, a question finally becomes too loud to ignore. Who, exactly, is responsible for knowing what waits beneath the water in front of a defended beach? Harrigan is not senior enough to dictate policy, but he is stubborn enough not to let the question go. During the choking, sleepless nights after Tarawa, when the screams of wounded Marines still seem to echo over the calm water, he begins to talk. Quietly, at first, in the mess, on the flag bridge between watch rotations, with gunnery officers, with intelligence men, with anyone who will listen. We walked in blind, he says, tapping a finger on a chart. We sent them into an unknown killing zone and hoped a few lines on paper and an aerial photo would be good enough. That's not reconnaissance. That's gambling. Someone jokes, bitterly, that if he cares so much about getting up close to a beach, he should swim in himself next time. Harrigan doesn't laugh. The thought sticks with him. Swim in yourself. He thinks of the men he'd worked with in bomb disposal, volunteers, misfits. Men who somehow didn't fit in on traditional ships or in traditional roles, but who had a peculiar talent for walking toward the thing everyone else wanted to avoid. He thinks of the handful of Marine and Army reconnaissance patrols that have already infiltrated enemy shorelines at night, moving through surf and jungle in tiny groups to map defenses and mark landing sites. It's not as though the idea is entirely new. It has just never been organized, formalized, given its own doctrine and tools. Not yet. But Tarawa changes the appetite for risk higher up the chain of command. The photographs of the dead tangled on the reef do more to move hearts and minds than any staff study. No admiral wants his name attached to another such disaster. In early 1944, in a heat-soaked corner of Florida, on a stretch of Atlantic beach that looks nothing like the Pacific atolls over which men are bleeding and dying, a new school opens its doors, or rather, flings them open and shouts for volunteers. Officially, it has an austere name: Naval Combat Demolition Training and Experimental Base. Unofficially, it is known by something far simpler. Hell. The man in charge is Commander Draper Kaufman, a thin, intense officer with horn-rimmed glasses and the slightly distracted air of a man whose mind is constantly 3 steps ahead of the conversation at hand. Before the United States entered the war, he had joined the British to defuse unexploded bombs in blitzed cities. He has seen what explosives can do when they are understood and when they are not. He has deep scars on his hands and arms to prove it. Now, Kaufman has been given a mandate that is both vague and revolutionary. Create small teams of men who can go in ahead of an amphibious landing, who can get up close to a hostile shore, in the water and on the sand, and determine exactly what awaits the main assault. Men who can measure surf and depth, chart reefs and underwater obstacles, locate mines and log booms and steel stakes, and anything else the enemy has dreamed up to drown landing craft and choke beaches. Men who can then destroy those obstacles with explosives, under fire if necessary, in the hours or days before the first wave hits. They are to be demolition experts, hydrographers, reconnaissance scouts, and shock absorbers all at once. Kaufman knows exactly who will not be suited to this job. Men who need clear orders at every turn. Men who think in straight lines. Men who find comfort in polished shoes and precise formations. Men who are only at ease when a problem fits into a known category and the solution is written down in a manual. He needs something else. So the call for volunteers is unusual. Strong swimmers, experienced sailors, men comfortable in the water, preferably with some experience in explosives or engineering, but that, he reasons, can be taught. What cannot be taught so easily is an instinct for danger, a willingness to improvise, a deep indifference to comfort and routine. Men who do not panic when plans change, because for them plans have always been something that happens to other people. On the bulletin boards of ships and bases, the posted notices promise nothing that would appeal to a normal sailor. No extra pay, no clear advancement. Just hazardous duty, demolition work, and the vague phrase, proximity to enemy shores. The men who show up at Fort Pierce in response are, predictably, a strange mix. There are Seabees, Naval Construction Battalion men, who have grown restless building airfields and docks and want in on it more directly. There are fleet sailors whose personnel files have too many pages in the disciplinary section, brawlers, chronic liberty hounds, men who have butted heads with petty officers and lieutenants and lost. There are lifeguards from California beaches who joined the Navy for adventure and have found themselves swabbing decks instead of charging surf. There are small-town boys whose swimming prowess was their only claim to fame back home. There are men pulled from the brig with the implicit offer volunteer, and maybe your current sins will be reconsidered. 90 of them, give or take, make it through the first intake for the program that will eventually beget the underwater demolition teams. The paperwork calls them Naval Combat Demolition Specialists. Their instructors call them hopeless cases and wild cards, and with a grudging edge of affection, troublemakers. They arrive at Fort Pierce to find that the base is little more than a strip of sand, a collection of huts, and a boundless supply of exhausting tasks. Training begins in the dark, usually before dawn, with a blast of a whistle and a hoarse voice bellowing everyone out of their bunks. There is no gentle warming up. They run, teeth chattering in the morning chill, straight into the surf. Waves slam them back onto the sand, tumble them head over heels, fill their mouths with salt. Instructors pace along the tide line, boots dry, shouting for them to push past the break, to swim further, to duck under waves instead of fighting them. Some men, used to the predictable deck of a ship, flail in the chaotic rush of water. Others slice through it like seals. They learn quickly that the ocean is not a backdrop. It is a weapon for or against them, depending on how well they know it. After surf torture comes calisthenics, then more running, then classes in explosives. They are taught the difference between TNT and composition C, how to calculate charge size. Not on paper, but in their heads, because there will be no comfortable desk on the side of a tossing rubber boat. They learn to cut through steel beams and timber pilings with shaped charges. They practice setting timers with numb fingers in cold water. They learn the sickening art of guessing, by sight and touch, how much damage a particular blast will do. Kaufman walks among them, watching who instinctively shields others when a demonstration charge goes off, who steps forward when an instructor needs a volunteer to approach a misfired fuse. He watches who grumbles about pointless punishment and who quietly adapts. He pays particular attention to the men who crack jokes under pressure, not because he finds them amusing, but because he knows that laughter can be a pressure valve in the tightest corners of hell. There is a ritual, quickly established, for dealing with those who fall short. The man who cannot swim strongly enough, who cannot fix his panic when a wave pushes him under and tumbles him, goes. The man whose hands shake too much when setting a detonator, who miscounts his pacing on a practice reef, goes. The man who cannot navigate by stars and instinct in a rubber boat off a blacked-out coast, goes. There are no hard feelings, no punishments. Just a quiet conversation and a ticket back to whatever base he came from. They cannot afford to lower the bar. By the end of the first hell week, A relentless crescendo of running, swimming drills, and little sleep. The original 90 have already thinned. Those who remain are leaner, bruised, sunburned, and, in many cases, deeply suspicious of authority in its usual forms. But they have begun to trust something else, one another. In the evenings, when the day's exhaustion briefly loosens its grip and the tropical insects begin their soft, droning chorus, small groups gather on the steps of the barracks, smoking, quietly trading stories. Joe, Red, Hanley, a red-headed first-class boatswain's mate who has been written up for fighting in more ports than he cares to count, flicks ash into the sand and says, "You know why they stuck us all out here? Because if we screw up and get killed, the Navy can pretend it was all just an experiment gone wrong." Across from him, Mac, a broad-shouldered CB chief with a drawl thick enough to slow time, grunts. "Then let's make it a successful experiment, Red, just to spite M." Tommy Alvarez, a former lifeguard from San Diego, leans back against the post, eyes turned toward the dim roar of surf beyond the wire. "You realize they're training us to do something nobody's quite done like this before, right? They don't know if this will work. They're making it up as they go," Red snorts. "Story of my life, pal." They laugh, but the laughter is edged with something else, a recognition that they are being molded into tools for a very specific kind of job, one where failure will be immediate and lethal, not spread out in ships or squadrons, but concentrated into the small circle of a rubber boat crew. There is, too, the knowledge that they are not entirely wanted. Occasionally, fleet officers rotate through Fort Pierce to observe the strange training. Some are curious, others are openly skeptical. A lieutenant commander from an amphibious force stands at the edge of the beach one day, hands on hips, watching a dozen men in swim trunks and fins haul heavy rubber boats over the dunes, then sprint back into the surf carrying coils of inert, explosive rope on their shoulders. "Goddamn bunch of circus performers," he mutters, not quite quietly enough. He sees their bare chests, their relaxed posture, their lack of salutes on the beach, and draws his own conclusions. He doesn't see the calluses on their hands, the bruises on their shins from colliding with coral. He doesn't see the notebooks filled with carefully drawn sketches of reef profiles, or the hours spent practicing underwater compass work in murky lagoons. Later, when he is invited to address the class and motivate them, he makes a joke about how they're all volunteers from the brig, and how, if they're lucky, they might just blow themselves up before the Japanese have a chance to do it. Red Hanley's jaw tightens. Mac's eyes go flat. Tommy stares straight ahead. They say nothing. But later, in the dark, when the surf pounds and the barracks' thin walls creak in the wind, more than one of them lies awake and vows, quietly, that they will show men like that what this strange new work can do. They do not know yet where they will first be sent. There is talk of the Marshalls, of some island with a name few can pronounce. Kaufman says little, other than to remind them that wherever they go, they will be going alone first. Think about what that means. He tells them, standing in front of the class one afternoon, a slant of sun cutting across the room and turning dust motes into slow fire sparks. You will be in the water, probably at night, not far from an enemy beach. The big guns on our ships will be pointed somewhere else. The planes will be elsewhere. It will be you and a small number of men. You won't have the luxury of calling up a staff officer on a radio and asking what to do next. He lets that sink in. If you find something unexpected, if the currents push you 200 yards off your planned course, if someone starts shooting at you with machine guns from a pier that wasn't on any map, what do you do? Someone in the back shifts. Another coughs. You decide, Kaufman says. You decide in that moment, with the information you have, you act. That's why we picked you. Because you've spent your lives pissing off people who like having every minute scripted. Out there, I promise you, that stubborn streak is going to save lives. Yours and everyone following you in. So the cadre of 90 troublemakers becomes something else. The first coherent group of men explicitly trained to assault the sea itself in order to open the way for others. Word finally comes down. The target is an atoll in the Marshalls, part of a Japanese defensive chain that guards the approaches to larger, deadlier islands. The island itself, ringed by reefs and backed by palm trees and airstrips, is held by an estimated 12,000 Japanese troops, infantry, gunners, engineers, and naval personnel compressed into a few square miles of coral and sand. 12,000 defenders. And into the water in front of them, the planners will send 90 men in swim trunks. Not all at once, of course. They will go in teams of 6 or 8, spread along miles of shoreline, measuring, marking, blowing, vanishing. They will be supported at a distance by destroyers and cruisers, their fire scheduled to suppress the obvious batteries and strongpoints visible from the air. Aircraft will orbit, watching for signs that the enemy has spotted the newcomers in the water. But when each team slips off the side of its rubber boat and into the sea, there will be an intimate closeness to the enemy that no pilot at 10,000 feet and no gunnery officer behind a plotting board will ever know. On the eve of departure from Pearl Harbor, Harrigan, now attached as a liaison between fleet operations and the new demolition teams, stands on the deck of a converted destroyer transport and watches the troublemakers sprawled along the railings and hatches. They are smoking, talking in low voices, some playing cards. Their gear sits in neat piles nearby: fins, masks, weighted belts, coils of waterproofed rope, satchel charges, grease pencils, slates. He sees Red Hanley try for the third time to roll a cigarette with fingers that still haven't quit shaking since a storm 2 nights ago. Red curses softly at the wind, then laughs and lets the paper scatter. He sees Mac meticulously checking detonators, lining them up in a row and clicking each one open and shut as if they were rosary beads. He sees Tommy staring out at the endless expanse of Pacific, eyes narrowed, as if trying to visualize the unknown shoreline ahead. Harrigan remembers standing on the bridge off Tarawa, watching men die on a reef no one had properly acknowledged. He feels a strange, almost guilty hope when he looks at these swimmers. If they succeed, the next Tarawa might be avoided. If they fail, they will probably die so quickly that there won't even be time to realize the experiment has gone wrong. The operation unfolds in 3 parts. First, reconnaissance. Days before the main landing force arrives, a small number of rubber boats slip into the water under the cover of darkness, lowering quietly from davits on fast transports. Each carries 4 or 5 demolition men and a coxswain. The outboard motors are barely above a whisper, muffled further by the sound of distant surf and the occasional rumble of far-off naval guns, checking their ranges. On each boat, one man hunches over a compass, another keeps his eyes fixed on the faint smudge of land ahead, ready to whisper course corrections to the man on the tiller. They wear darkened clothing. Their weapons are minimal, a few pistols, knives, maybe a carbine or 2 tucked under the gunwales. They are not here to fight, they are here to see. 100, 200 yards from where they judge the reef to begin, motors cut. Silence falls thick and sudden. The boats drift, black shapes on a black sea. The men listen. Sometimes they hear nothing but the hiss of water on coral and the faint creak of their own boat seams. Sometimes there is the murmur of voices from shore, in a language most of them do not understand but whose meaning is clear enough: guards, bored or vigilant, passing the time. One by one, the swimmers slip over the side. The water curls cold around their ankles, then their knees, then their hips. Weighted belts pull them down until just heads and shoulders show above the surface. They begin to move in slow strokes, bodies flattened to reduce their profile. Slates and pencils are secured by cords around their necks. Each man carries a length of weighted line marked in knots to sound the depth as he goes. Every 10 yards, or whenever the sea seems to change, the lead plumbs the bottom and a quick mark is made: 6 feft, 3 feft. Sharp coral, sand patch. They feel their way forward like blind men along a cliff edge. The reef, when they reach it, rises up out of the darkness like a black, jagged wall. Waves trip over its outer lip and collapse in chaos, a roaring, frothing barrier of white. Climbing over it in the dark with gear would be impossible for landing craft. The swimmers know this. What they need to know is exactly where there are gaps, channels, slightly deeper cuts that a boat might punch through, or where explosives will be needed to clear a path. Tommy, on his first real mission, finds himself almost nose to coral, the sandpapery rock inches from his face as he ducks under an incoming wave. He feels it clip his back, shove him down, then pull away. For a moment he is suspended, tumbling in blackness, his sense of up and down erased. Training takes over. He curls, kicks blindly, feels the tug of his weighted line as it drops toward the seabed. He surfaces, spitting water, keeping his profile low. On shore, maybe 150 yards away beyond the reef, he can see the dark mass of palm trees. A flicker of light, someone smoking, a lantern quickly hooded, the silhouette of a guard tower. He freezes. No shout comes, no muzzle flashes. He waits, heart pounding in his ears, then continues. Back on the boats, men log coordinates as their swimmers surface and whisper measurements. One team discovers that a charted channel actually leads straight into a submerged field of sharpened stakes. Another finds that a stretch assumed too shallow is, thanks to an unknown cut, actually navigable for certain lighter craft. On one sector of the island, Mac's team comes across something unexpected, a line of strange, brush-covered shapes extending out from the beach into the shallows. He dives, moving closer, fingers reaching out to touch. He feels smooth hull, metal brackets. It takes him a second to realize he is moving along the keel of a scuttled Japanese barge, sunk deliberately to block landing craft. More hooks follow, all arranged at slightly different angles, overlapping fields of obstruction. On his slate, in big, insistent letters, he writes, Dabariski Ba'araikidi, NEDAVDMO. They withdraw before dawn, slipping back into the boats, motors coughing softly to life. As the sky pales in the east, the island dwindles behind them, becoming once more just another low smudge on an infinite horizon. When they clamber back aboard the transport, shivering, skin wrinkled, eyes bloodshot from salt, they are hustled straight to a cramped room where Harrigan and a handful of staff officers wait with coffee and blank charts. The troublemakers become, for a few critical hours, expert witnesses. They sketch reef lines by hand. They describe the feel of the coral under their knees. Jagged here, smoother there. They argue about where exactly the depth passes from chest high to ankle high. They report the locations of obstacles, of barbed wire glimpsed beneath the surface, of what might have been mines wired to oil drums. They speak in a language improvised from the marriage of sailors' slang and engineering terms. Harrigan listens, scribbling furiously, cross-referencing with aerial photos, trying to pull a coherent picture out of the mosaic. He has never felt closer to the actual shoreline than he does now, with these dripping, shivering men crowding around the table, jabbing calloused fingers at penciled lines. It's like we finally switched on a light, he murmurs to himself. The light is for more than his benefit. Naval gunfire plans are adjusted. The heaviest shells will now walk across the scuttled barge barricade, just before the demolition teams go in to set charges, to keep the enemy's head down. Landing waves are shifted left and right to align with the natural channels discovered by the swimmers. Temp tables are tweaked to account for the true tides, not the approximate readings from distant charts. The second part of the operation is demolition. This time, they will not go in under the cover of darkness. Time and coincidence have conspired. The tides are wrong. To get enough water over the reefs for the main landing craft, the best window is mid-morning, which means the demolition teams must go in shortly before that. Close enough that there is no opportunity for the enemy to replace what has been destroyed, but far enough ahead that the landing waves are not tangled up in a field of half-cut obstacles and detonating charges. It will be daylight. The Japanese will be alert, or can be made so in minutes. The swimmers talk about this in their compartments the night before, voices low. What's the distance from the reef to the beach again? Red asks, staring at the deck. Depends on the sector, Mac replies. On ours, maybe 150 yards. Give or take. Under small arms fire, someone adds. Tommy picks at a frayed edge of his towel. At least we won't have to worry about tripping over each other in the dark. They laugh softly, a thin sound. At dawn, the fleet closes in. Battleships take station, their long barrels already angled toward the island. Destroyers weave back and forth, ready to throw up curtains of smoke if needed. Aircraft engines rumble as fighters and bombers form up overhead. In the well decks of the transport ships, the demolition teams gear up, clothing as little as possible. Swim trunks, perhaps a light sweater for those more sensitive to the chill. Shoes. Either thin-soled sneakers or nothing. Depending on personal preference, boots are a liability when swimming and clambering on slick coral. On their heads, simple caps to keep the sun off. Some smear black grease across cheekbones and noses, less for camouflage than to dull the sun's brutal glare off the water. Around their waists, belts with small pouches for detonators, fuses, and tools. Across their chests, coils of hollow rubber hose stuffed with explosive charges, Bangalore torpedoes, modified for underwater use, or lengths of primacord arranged in loops that can be wrapped around wooden piles or steel beams. Some carry pre-cut blocks of composition explosive, others canvas sacks that will be filled with sand or stones to anchor charges in place. No body armor, no helmets, unless they want them for the run in on the boats. Nothing that will catch the water and drag them under. It is, in some ways, an obscenely simple uniform for men about to swim into the killing zone of 12,000 entrenched soldiers. On the transport's loudspeaker, a voice crackles. Demolition teams to your stations. 10 minutes to launch. A Red pulls his cap down low, slaps Mac on the shoulder. Reckon the Japanese are ready for a bunch of half-naked lunatics this morning. Mac grins, teeth flashing white against his sun-browned face. If they weren't before, they will be. Tommy feels his mouth go dry as he steps down the cargo net into the bobbing rubber boat below. The smell of the sea rises up to meet him, sharp and familiar. His heart, surprisingly, slows rather than races. The training has burned into his muscles a quiet conviction the body knows what to do. The coxswain opens the throttle. The boat lunges toward the island. As they dash over the swells, the naval bombardment kicks into full fury. Massive shells howl overhead, trailing dirty clouds. They impact along the beach in a staggering rhythm, geysers of water and sand erupting. Palm trees bowing and snapping, bunkers crumpling. The whole shoreline seems to lift and fall as if breathing. Some part of Tommy, the part that had once watched surf from a lifeguard tower and counted seconds between sets of waves, now counts the seconds between shells. He knows from Tarawa's stories that it is easy to believe such a bombardment has killed everything. He also knows it has not. The boats reach the line where the water shallows, engines sputtering as their propellers start to bite air along with sea. The coxswain snarls, cuts the motor. "This is as far as we go," he shouts. "Over the side," Red barks, his voice flat, matter of fact. One by one, the demolition men drop into chest, deep water. The shock of it, cooler than the air with a biting edge, helps focus their minds. They spread out roughly in line, each team angling toward its assigned sector of reef. On the island, the shells continue to fall. But here and there, in the momentary lulls, the defenders begin to stir. Heads emerge from trenches. Periscopes jab through firing slits. Men peer seaward, trying to see through the smoke and spray. At first, what they see are still the big silhouettes of landing ships and gunboats. What they do not see, or do not understand, are the tiny, scattered heads of men bobbing in the water hundreds of yards closer. The swimmers advance, bows of water curling off their shoulders. The reef looms up, a jagged gray line just beneath the surface. They clamber onto it, gasping as sharp coral cuts into bare feet and knees. Ahead, only a few more yards of shallows, Then sand and the first line of obstacles. The Japanese have not been idle. Rows of stakes thrust up from the shallows, topped with mines. Tangled belts of barbed wire snake just below the surface, invisible from a distance. Antiboat. Hedgehogs. Steel beams welded into cruel, angular shapes dot the approach. Some are wired with charges, others are simply there to rip open the bellies of landing craft, to slow and bunch them up for the guns. This entire stretch of water is a machine designed to kill. The demolition teams get to work breaking it. Tommy and his partner move toward a cluster of stakes. Each one supports a cylindrical object that could be a mine or a dummy. There is no way to know until you get close, too close. They duck under, bubbles streaming from their noses, and feel carefully along the base of the stake. Wires, sandbags, a simple wooden anchor. They surface, exchange a glance, then begin to wrap a length of primacord around the central trunk, securing it with swift, practiced knots. 30 yards down the line, Mac oversees a team working on a section of barbed wire. They attach torpedo, like charges along it at regular intervals, the cord snaking back to a central detonator location. The work is monotonous, fiddly, and deeply exposed. Even through the bombardment, some Japanese gunners finally begin to notice the strange new shapes in the water. The first bullets snap overhead, little more than angry hornets in the cacophony. Then a machine gun, sighted high in a coconut log bunker, finds its range. Water plumes jump around Tommy and his partner. He hears the zip of rounds slicing through the surface near his ear. Instinct screams at him to duck, to curl up, to make himself small. Training snaps back, keep moving. The best defense is to break contact, to finish and get out before the enemy truly zeroes them. "Skip that last one," he gasps to his partner, pointing to a stake they'd intended to wire next. "We've got enough to make a gap." "Go." They half swim, half stagger back toward the reef, explosives now set on a half-dozen obstacles. Behind them, another team is finishing priming a line of ladder. Charges designed to blast a swath through the underwater hedgehogs. On shore, a Japanese officer stands in a fortified observation post, binoculars pressed to his face. He has watched the American bombardment with professional detachment, ignoring the claustrophobic tremor of earth and air. He knows his men are dug in deep. He has faith in their discipline. Now his lenses pick out something new. Men, small as insects, moving in the shallows where, according to his plans, no landing craft should be. They do not come in dense waves. They are scattered, spread thinly along the front, each group focused on some specific tangle of obstacles. They do not charge the beach. They pause among the stakes and steel, hands busy under the water. He feels a chill that has nothing to do with the breeze through the firing slit. Saboteurs. He barks orders. Machine guns adjust their arcs. Mortars are cranked up by a few degrees. The shallow water, which had seemed secure behind iron and wood and measured arcs of fire, suddenly looks naked. Mortar shells begin to fall among the swimmers. The explosions are muffled but still dreadful, blossoms of white spray and black shrapnel. A blast picks up one of Red's team and hurls him sideways, his body tumbling limply across the coral. Red dives after him, fingers closing around an arm slick with blood. He drags him back behind a low hummock of reef barely higher than their knees. "Can you swim?" he shouts. The wounded man blinks, blood washing down his face. "Hell if I know." "Then float, I'll pull." Red slaps a half-primed satchel charge into the man's free hand. "And don't you drop that, it's expensive." The joke is terrible. It is also the only bridge back to something like normalcy in that moment. The wounded man huffs a laugh, spits pink foam, then kicks weakly as Red hauls him toward the relative safety of the boats. Elsewhere along the line, another team leader makes a different call. Pinned down by fire that is walking closer with each burst, he looks at the finished work in front of him. The last length of wire, the final cluster of stakes, the stubborn hedgehog too close to a bunker to approach, without drawing even more fire. He does the mental math, how much they've already cut, how wide a gap the completed charges will make, how quickly his men are tiring.
Back!
He roars.
That's it, we're done. Fall back!
Sir, there's still.
Back!
You want to die for that last stake? Go swim alone. They leave it. Later, some landing craft will scrape against that uncut obstacle, perhaps slow or divert. But the main lanes will be open, the worst teeth pulled from the reef's jaw. It is the sort of decision that no manual could prescribe in advance, made in seconds by a man waist deep in water, bullets cracking around him. On the destroyer screen, gunnery officers peer through rangefinders, trying to track where the enemy's fire is most intense. They catch glimpses of splashes among the reef, figure out what it must be, their own men in the water unexpectedly visible, too close to the beach for comfort.
Shift fire!
One captain orders. Walk it up just beyond those swimmers.
Give 'em some cover!
Massive 5-inch guns adjust, belching bright tongues of flame. Shells slam into the palm line just behind the Japanese machine gun nests, showering them with dirt and splinters. Some positions go quiet, others simply duck and wait. In the maelstrom of surf, gunfire, and explosions, the demolition work goes on. By some blend of training, stubbornness, and sheer feral luck, most of the charges are placed. Fuses are lit or electric detonators wired. Cords run back to hastily chosen firing points along the reef. Little more than patches of coral behind which men can curl up and shield themselves. Tommy, chest heaving, slaps a palm against the shoulder of his team's firing man. Now, he shouts. All along the line, plumes of water and debris rise as obstacles vanish in concussive flashes. Stakes snap like matchsticks, their minds either detonating sympathetically or tumbling harmlessly into the depths. Wire is shredded. Steel structures collapse into twisted heaps that, while still dangerous, are no longer the carefully placed killers they were an hour earlier. For a moment, there is a strange hush. Even the enemy guns seem to falter, as if stunned by this unexpected violence in the shallow water. Then the whistle signals from the boats, sharp and urgent. Fall back to boats! The swimmers go, some gliding cleanly through the water, others limping, trailing blood. Red hauls his wounded man over the gunwale with a grunt. Mac counts heads, comes up one short, and stares at the churning water, where his missing man should be. He forces himself to turn away. He has learned the cruel arithmetic of small units. Sometimes you do not get to know where or when a teammate vanished. As the last demolition man scrambles over the side of the last rubber boat, the naval gunfire intensifies again. Now the bombardment has precise purpose to rake the newly cleared approaches and pin down any enemy who might try to reconstruct the defensive belts. Beyond the smudge of the reef, landing craft muster in long, ragged lines. They have been listening to radio snippets, to hurried updates from Harrigan and others. Gaps cleared between points X and Y. Obstacle belts significantly reduced in sector orange. Recommend first wave concentrate on these lanes. What they have not seen until now is the faces of the men who made those changes possible. As one line of boats passes closer to the withdrawing rubber craft, a Marine corporal looks over and blinks. He sees men in swim trunks and half-torn shirts, cuts on their arms, strange coils of rope and hose in their laps, exhaustion stamped deeply into their features. They look like shipwreck survivors, not like the polished images of heroes from recruiting posters. Who the hell are those guys? He asks. The boat's coxswain, a salty veteran with his own opinions, spits over the side. Troublemakers, he says. Demolition guys. Heard they're all nuts. He says it with rough admiration. The main landing that follows is no cakewalk. Men still die. Japanese guns still rake the beaches. Some landing craft are hit, some Marines are cut down in the surf. The island's 12,000 defenders do not give up easily. They fight from bunkers, from caves, from trenches that have to be cleared one by one. But something is palpably different from Tarawa. The boats do not pile up helplessly on an unknown reef. They know where the channels are, where to expect shallows. The first waves do not stall en masse under a wall of obstacles. They find lanes through the water, marked by the absence of stakes and steel, by hastily erected buoys dropped by the demolition teams. The price paid in blood is still terrible, but it is not blindly compounded by ignorance. On the flagship, Harrigan stands over the updated charts, the scribbled notes of the swimmers now overwritten with the official record of the battle's opening hours. He thinks of those 90 men, of the ones who have already given their lives in this one experiment, and of the ones who will be sent into the water again on the next island, and the next, and the next. He realizes something that the Navy as an institution is only beginning to grasp. These men are not just a stopgap solution to a particular problem of reef and obstacle. They are the tip of a new philosophy of war. In the months that follow, the strange, half-clothed swimmers of the first demolition teams become a familiar, if still faintly disreputable, sight in the amphibious task forces of the Pacific. Their numbers grow. More volunteers arrive at Fort Pierce and its forward successors, sailors who flinch not at the idea of swimming under fire, Marines restless for a different kind of fight, CBs with a knack for making things blow up exactly where and when they want. Draper Kaufman's rough selection process hardens into something approaching doctrine. The trainees are pushed harder. Those who complain that the instructors are too cruel rarely make it past the first week. Those who quietly accept the suffering, who learn to work through fatigue and pain with a certain grim humor, stay. They learn to surf in on breaking waves without losing their gear, to navigate by currents and stars, even when clouds smother the sky, to read the subtle language of the shoreline, the way certain patterns of wave break hint at hidden sandbars or deep cuts, how discolored patches of water might signal mines or logs just beneath the surface. They also learn to disobey in constructive ways. In a traditional unit, disobedience is a vice. In the demolition teams, soon to be formalized as underwater demolition teams (UDT), it becomes, carefully channeled, a virtue. Men are expected to follow broad orders, to survey a beach, to clear a lane, to reconnoiter a harbor. But within that framework, small unit leaders are given wide latitude. If a planned approach is obviously suicidal, they are allowed to adjust. If a target of opportunity presents itself, an unguarded pier, an ammunition barge riding high at anchor, they can strike. The feedback loop is short. What they learn in one operation is fed almost immediately back into training and planning for the next. Their reputation as troublemakers persists, sometimes to their advantage. There are captains who still want nothing to do with them, who resent their lax discipline on deck, the way they lounge shirtless, the way they slap their officers on the back or use first names. There are ship's XOs who look at the UDT gear, homemade modifications, non-standard knives, odd bits of captured enemy equipment, and mutter about undermining good order and discipline. Yet when word comes that the next island has a particularly nasty reef, or that aerial photos suggest elaborate obstacle fields, those same captains quietly insist, in memos and meetings, that experienced demolition swimmers be assigned to their task forces. On beaches from the Marshalls to the Marianas, from Saipan to Guam, the pattern repeats. Night before the landing, small boats. Silent swimmers feeling their way along the unseen bones of the island. Morning of half-naked men in the surf, working under fire, detonations whooping through water and air as carefully placed charges turn razor-toothed barricades into scrap. After, waves of Marines and soldiers landing on beaches that, while still lethal, no longer bear the cruel surprise of Tarawa's uncharted reefs. Each operation teaches the team something new. At Saipan, they learn that not every enemy will obligingly allow them to work in daylight. Some Japanese units, having learned hard lessons of their own, begin to fire at swimmers almost as soon as they appear, forcing them to adapt to nighttime demolition, to work by touch alone in ink, black water. At Guam, they discover that some beaches are fringed not by simple coral but by long, sloping shelves of volcanic ash that collapse unpredictably underfoot, a nightmare for tanks and heavy equipment. Their reports, delivered with urgency back to planners, help adjust landing sites in time to avoid the worst of these death traps. At Iwo Jima, under the shadow of Sulphur Island's smoking volcano, UDT men go in days before the first Marines, reconnoitering beaches where underwater sulfur vents and steep drop-offs make the water itself a kind of enemy. They come back with eyes red from poisonous fumes, with burns on their feet from the hot sands, and with charts that prove more accurate than any aerial photograph could be. In each case, the pattern holds: small teams, high risk, deep trust in the judgment of the men on the ground or in the water. Beyond the Pacific, echoes of this new philosophy are taking shape elsewhere in the war. In Europe, army units like Darby's Rangers and Merrill's Marauders push deep behind enemy lines, living off what they can carry, gathering intelligence, striking swiftly at key points rather than holding broad fronts. Marine raiders, in the early years of the Pacific War, experimented with similar tactics on jungle-clad islands before being folded back into regular divisions. The Office of Strategic Services in Europe and China, Burma, India, trains men for sabotage missions far behind the main lines. All of these efforts share a kind of DNA and emphasis on initiative, on adaptability, on selecting men as much for their minds and temperament as for their physical traits. But it is the naval demolition swimmers, with their unique relationship to sea and shore, who will eventually leave one of the most direct imprints on what comes after. By the time the war in the Pacific grinds toward its bloody end, Okinawa, the looming specter of an invasion of Japan itself, the underwater demolition teams are no longer an experiment. They are a recognized, if still somewhat eccentric, component of the fleet. They have proven that a handful of men, properly trained and equipped, can alter the course of a major amphibious operation by making the invisible visible and the impassable passable. They have also proven something more subtle, more profound, that in certain kinds of warfare, victory does not come from more men in more boats or more shells delivered on more targets, but from a handful of individuals placed precisely where the enemy does not expect them, doing things the enemy cannot imagine. After the war, as the great mobilized armies of 1945 demobilize, many of the demolition men hang up their fins and return to civilian life. They become carpenters, fishermen, insurance salesmen, swimming coaches. Some carry scars that ache every time the weather changes. Others carry memories that throb in the quiet hours of the night, the sudden blossom of a misjudged charge, the sight of a teammate vanishing in a cloud of spray, and never resurfacing, the strangely peaceful beauty of phosphorescent trails in the wake of bullets at night. But the idea they embodied does not discharge so easily. The Navy keeps several UDT units active in the post-war years, if on a reduced scale. In occupied Japan, they help clear harbors of wrecks and mines. In Korea, 5 years later, when a new war flares unexpectedly on a peninsula half a world away, the underwater demolition men find themselves once again in small boats off hostile shores. This time, they conduct raids on rail lines and bridges along the Korean coast, slipping in under cover of darkness, planting charges on pylons and seawalls, then vanishing back into the surf. They reconnoiter beaches for landings at places like Incheon, where treacherous tides and mudflats make the sea as much an ally and enemy as any army. As the Cold War takes shape, strategy documents in Washington acquire new phrases: limited war, unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency. Political leaders begin to understand that the next conflicts will not always be total wars with clear front lines. They may be brushfire conflicts, guerrilla wars in jungles and deltas, shadowy struggles fought by proxies and deniable forces. Large divisions and fleets will still matter, but so will something else, something smaller, more surgical. In 1961, a new president stands on a platform and speaks of paying any price, bearing any burden, meeting any hardship in defense of liberty. Behind closed doors, he asks his military advisors what tools they have for fighting the murkier, less conventional battles he expects to face. In the Navy's corner of that conversation, someone mentions the underwater demolition teams. Good men, another officer says. tough, smart. But their charter is pretty narrow: beach reconnaissance, demolition. They're not structured for, say, inland operations, direct action deep upriver, that kind of thing. What if they were? The question comes back. And so, with paperwork and memos and planning conferences that could not be further in tone from the surf-blasted days of Fort Pierce, a conceptual line is drawn from those 90 troublemakers in World War II to something new. Sea, air, land. SEAL. The Navy SEAL teams, when they are officially established in 1962, are not simply rebranded UDT units. They absorb influences from across the spectrum: OSS Maritime Operations, Army Special Forces, British Special Boat Service, even lessons from guerrilla units in Asia. Their missions are broader: covert reconnaissance, hostage rescue, direct action raids, counterinsurgency support. Yet at their core, in their ethos, and in the way they select and train their people, the shadow of those wartime demolition swimmers is unmistakable. The selection process for SEALs is brutal by design. Candidates are pushed through evolutions that would have felt familiar, if harsher, to the men of Fort Pierce: endless runs in sand, surf torture, sleep deprivation, complex tasks performed while the body screams for rest. But just as in the earliest days, instructors are watching for more than physical toughness. They are watching for how candidates think under stress, how they adapt when the plan falls apart, how they treat teammates who are even more exhausted than they are. Many of the petty tyrannies of peacetime military life, obsession with perfectly polished boots, with creases in uniforms, with salutes delivered at rigid angles, are deliberately set aside. What matters is whether a man can carry a heavy rucksack and a rifle through swamp and jungle, then swim miles upriver at night, and still have the clarity to make a life or death decision at the objective. The culture that emerges is one where questioning orders is not a crime, so long as it is done with the mission in mind, where breaking a small rule to accomplish a larger goal is expected, where a certain degree of being a troublemaker is not a liability but a requirement. In Vietnam, SEAL platoons will prowl the labyrinthine waterways of the Mekong Delta and the stinking mangrove swamps of the Rung Sat, slipping from riverine boats into water as dark and murky as any South Pacific night. They will wade through paddies and ditches, infiltrate villages, collect intelligence, launch ambushes, and disappear. They will suffer casualties, make mistakes, learn harsh lessons, and earn a reputation among both allies and enemies as ghost-like, unpredictable, relentlessly adaptive fighters. When asked, years later, how they came to be so comfortable operating at that intersection of land and water and darkness, some of the older SEALs will shrug and say, "It started with the frogmen, with the UDT." They might tell, if pressed, stories handed down in their training pipeline. Stories of men who swam through machine gun fire in nothing but shorts and fins, of misfits who turned out to be indispensable, of commanders like Draper Kaufman and field officers like Harrigan who saw, before most, that war's future would belong in part to those willing to step outside the neat lines of traditional doctrine. The lineage, of course, is more complex than a straight line from 90 men against 12,000. Historians will point out all the other threads that weave into the tapestry of modern special operations. British commandos raiding St. Nazaire, Norwegian saboteurs stopping heavy water production, Soviet partisans disrupting rail lines, countless unnamed resistance fighters in occupied countries. Yet there is something uniquely instructive about the birth of the naval combat demolition teams in World War II. They emerged not from a place of triumph, but from failure, from the blood-slick reefs of Tarawa, where ignorance about a strip of coral turned into catastrophe. They were not championed by generals eager to create elite clubs, but by officers haunted by the knowledge that better reconnaissance and preparation could have saved hundreds of lives. They were staffed not by the shining stars of the academies, but by the men the system had partially rejected: brawlers, breakers of minor rules, restless spirits, the sort of men who, in peacetime, might have cycled endlessly through disciplinary boards or been quietly eased out of the service. In a war as vast and demanding as the one that engulfed the world in the 1940s, those men became something else. They became the ones sent first against 12,000, standing on the deck of a rust-streaked transport as the sun sets over a calm Pacific sometime. After that first brutal island operation, Harrigan leans on the rail and watches the sea turn gold, then red, then purple. He thinks of the faces of the demolition men he's met, of Red's irreverent grin, of Mac's quiet competence, of Tommy's stubborn insistence on swimming one more length even when everyone else is ready to quit. He thinks of the ones whose names he never learned, who lie now beneath the waves they once probed so fearlessly. He thinks of how narrow the path was between their lives and oblivion, not just in terms of enemy bullets and misfired charges, but in the sense that, had a few senior officers been more conservative, more bound to tradition, the whole experiment might have been cancelled after its first bloody setback. Instead, necessity forced innovation. Failure forced humility. Humility forced someone to say, "We do not know enough, and we need people who can go find out, no matter the cost." In that crucible, a certain kind of warrior found his place. A man as comfortable in water as on land. A man able to carry in his head both the measurements of a reef and the likely thought process of an enemy engineer. A man who could make a decision in seconds, in the dark, with partial information, and live with the consequences. A man who did not require rows of medals or the adulation of masses, because his triumphs would often be invisible. A landing that went better than expected. A day when casualties were fewer than they might have been. A beach that seemed strangely, mercifully less lethal than the one in the last battle. The Navy SEALs and the broader community of modern special operations forces would later codify this mindset into mottos and maxims. The only easy day was yesterday. It pays to be a winner. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. They would formalize selection and training into carefully crafted pipelines. But beneath all the slogans and structures lies the same hard truth that was born off a nameless reef in World War II. Sometimes, when conventional plans fail, when well-drawn arrows on charts dissolve in the smoke of real battle, everything depends on a small group of people willing to step into the unknown first. To them fall the hardest questions. What is really out there? What have we missed? How can we turn the terrain itself? Sea, air, land, from an enemy's ally into ours. What are we willing to risk, and who are we willing to send? In the Pacific, in those years when island after island rose on the horizon under hostile guns, the answer was, improbably, beautifully, send the troublemakers. Send the 90 men the system didn't quite know what to do with. The ones who argued, who improvised, who didn't fit neatly into the ranks. Give them fins, explosives, and permission to think. Tell them. In effect, go out there and figure it out, then come back and tell us what you learned.